The story of Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars is a compelling one. We see how he fell to the dark side and became Darth Vader because of his obsession for keeping Padme Amidala alive. He loved her so much that he feared her death, and he had visions of her death. And these visions of her death gave him the motivation to seek knowledge that would give him the ability to stop death, to stop her from dying, and to have the ability to stop everyone that he loved from dying. Because as a child, most of his life was placed in these confines of being a slave. And him not having, a father figure, and Obi-Wan kind of became that for him. The Jedi Temple kind of became like a fatherly organization for him. But there's so much fear placed in the existence of a slave in the Star Wars universe, and all slaves in general, but in the Star Wars universe, that fear of not being in control, of one's fate and the fate of those around them, became a chief motivator in his later pursuit of knowledge to be able to control death itself, specifically the death of Padme Amidala. His mother was taken from him, and it was beyond his control. If he was there, and he felt bad about that, if he was there, he could have stopped it, but he wasn't. And because of his own frustration, he was very angry at the Tusken Raiders for taking his mother's life, but his anger towards them and how he killed all of them, even, men, women, and children, this whole tribe, it wasn't just because that they killed his mother, and they certainly did, but he was frustrated at himself. He was angry at himself that he wasn't there, and he would have been there if it wasn't for the Jedi Order. But at the same time, the Jedi Order gave him power to have the ability to wield a lightsaber, to have a lightsaber, and to use it to slay the Tusken Raiders. So there's this conflict. And, being drawn to Emperor Palpatine's stories of the Sith, Darth Plagueis controlling life and death, and Darth Plagueis was very much focused on controlling life and death, being able to manipulate the lives of others, not save himself, as Emperor Palpatine made a point of mentioning, but to actually stop others from dying. If he could exert his will on that very cusp of existence as they died, he could stop them from dying by manipulating the midichlorians in their bodies. But the Force in general, him having a higher midichlorian count than the vast majority of the universe, and him still understanding and valuing the Force, drew him more to the dark side, in the sense that, instead of just renouncing the Jedi, instead of just renouncing, the Sith as he learned about them, instead of renouncing them, he still believed in the Force. He held faith in the Force, but he was drawn towards the Sith ideology of personal power because of his feeling of lack of power early on in his life as a slave, in the death of his mother, not being able to stop that death, and him having these visions of his wife dying. He became so focused on keeping her alive, or gaining the knowledge for that. That became his prime motivator. That was the most valuable thing to him, keeping his wife alive so that she would not die like his mother died, that he would have control over life in a way that he never could have had as a slave in the Star Wars universe. As he became more obsessed with this knowledge, he was able to convince himself that the compromises in order to get this knowledge were acceptable. Learning about the Sith, knowing the Sith were bad, yet if the Sith had the knowledge, if Palpatine had the knowledge, and later Darth Sidious, he learned, had the knowledge, and he believed in the Force already, and he was afraid of not having the knowledge to prevent what he most feared, the compromises, every other compromise, became more palatable. And as he made more and more compromises, he became a person that was not the person Padme fell in love with. As he became more obsessed with keeping her alive, he drove her away as a person. In trying to gain the knowledge to keep her alive and the control over their lives, he became someone who she never would have fallen in love with. she never would have been drawn to. And she saw these changes in him and the obsession with power. And at some point, the love of power became the love that was the draw for all of his ability to love. It tipped the balance in the favor of power over Padme, especially when we see that he force choked her on Mustafar. He felt like, he had done all these things to keep her alive, to gain power so that the people that he loved wouldn't die. Yet she turned against him. She turned away from him, and even suspecting that Obi-Wan Kenobi had turned her away from him and that they were lovers. And these compromises that led him down this darker path, these compromises that led him to greater power, were actually what made him more and more insecure. Because as he sought this power, as he made more compromises, that power became more attractive. That power, that motivator for that power became more and more prime over his love for Padme. Now, Padme was, of course, never turned against him by Obi-Wan Kenobi or any other force. It was Anakin himself that turned Padme against him. And that he became a person that she could not love because of this obsession. And the obsession, ironically, took more and more focus away from her. And he became more in love with the idea of keeping her alive than her as a person herself. He became in love with the idea of being able to control life and death, rather than valuing the life that they had at this moment. So focused on a vision of what might happen, and the death that she might go through, that he could not see her distress at his changes, her distress and her opinions and her everything that makes life valuable, our individuality, our communication, our opinions, our understanding of morality and individuality. She started to become one with life as a monolith, rather than somebody who could interfere with his vision of how to achieve that monolith. That became her life and power and all these things amalgamated. His sense of self became focused on power, and he no longer valued her sense of self. He might not have understood it that way, but her sense of self became, and her individuality, her choices, and her opinion became less valuable than just keeping her alive as an object. He basically objectified her, and he made both himself previously and her and his friends like Obi-Wan Kenobi, they became something that was inhibiting him from actually helping them. And he, in his view, he wanted to help them, and they wouldn't let him. And in fact, they didn't want him to have the power. They didn't want him to have the control. They wanted to work against him and keep him from having that control that could actually help them, that could actually bring them from the brink of death. They wanted to keep him from getting that because they were conspiring against him. And that's where the paranoia of power comes in, where he was obsessed with losing what he had, and he was obsessed with losing the path to ultimate power that he was on. He was so obsessed with that any new evolution in the person that was Padme Obi-Wan became moot. His conception and their actions their opinions could not change his conception of them, or his primacy and his agency in the responsibility to keep them alive. And that created greater frustration within him and helped his transformation into Darth Vader. But unlike a lot of Sith, Anakin, it was very much a path of suffering, and not necessarily just reliant upon the emotions of suffering, but trying to stop suffering that actually led him into creating greater suffering. How does this apply to love for, in real life? How does this apply to love in general? So because of his specificity of path, as he became more and more specific of a person, he expected those around him, those he loved, to become specific enough that they could be contained into the context of the box that he was placing himself in. He wanted them to align to the context in which he understood the universe and them, rather than entering them into the equation as far as conversing with them, communicating with them. He decided that the context and the understanding that he held them in was paramount to their opinion of that context. And a lot of the time when we really love somebody and we want to gain their participation in life, there's something that we gain from people. But the more specific of a person that we become, and the more alienated from the ones that we love we become, and the more focused on this very specific path that we become, even if it's a path to preserve their lives, initially it became the path to power eventually. But we expect them to understand things as we understand them. And we expect them to accept our agency over their life. And in the more id faction, the more passionate faction, the more passion of all this, we want to extract happiness from people rather than considering them in the equation as far as their opinions and conversing with them. There are many people in this world who want to extract happiness from people. Whatever you get from somebody, it can become more and more an extraction of happiness rather than including them in happiness. Individuals should both promote and elevate each other. We shouldn't try to force our context of our life and our understanding of our path and our understanding of the universe onto them. Whatever the context that they have for themselves, or whatever their understanding of the universe, or even if they have negative opinions of us, we should always allow them to be that. And if paths at some point become so divergent that there's a relationship is no longer there to be had in the same way or at all, then we have to be able to let go. We can't force them into a situation or into a context where we get everything that we want and they have to accept that our understanding is correct, our agency is correct. We have to recognize the agency of those that we love. We have to recognize that relationships can end if they have to, if we become so different. And if we had a prime motivator, such as keeping somebody alive or the benefits of those that we love, then we have to continually include them into that equation. We can't seek something that is okay as it is and try to keep it as it is. And so focused on keeping that relationship the same way and extracting happiness in the same way, so focused on not losing a person as a resource, that them as an individual, a choosing individual, is taken out of the relationship, taken out of our consideration. Sometimes we do choose paths for ourselves that lead us away from those that we love. Sometimes we do choose paths for ourselves that people in our lives no longer fit in the same context. And sometimes that does lead us away from people. But if indeed the original motivator was that we love this person, and if we do still love them, then we might have to reconsider certain elements of our path, or certain elements of the relationship, or certain elements of what we even expect from the universe. Because the universe does not bend to our will, and our effort to make it bend to our will always lead to failure, because the universe is much bigger than us. The grander humanity is much bigger than us. It is not something that can be forced into a sequence of events or a relationship that we wish to see everything through. Trying to force all your blocks into a line and stack them up like Legos. People do that to each other, even in calculations between people. A lot of the time we view people as Lego blocks that just stick on top of each other. It doesn't work that way. We have to see that we ourselves are a Lego block. We are not just the creator of other people's destinies, and not just the only lover. That they are a lover as well, and they wish to withdraw their love. Then we have to respect that decision, and we have to reconsider the motivations for our own love. This is true of our relationship to the entire universe, but specifically for Anakin, Padme's opinions became incorrect, and he became suspicious. Because why would she want to keep him from getting this power? Why would she want to keep him from protecting her? Obviously, she was trying to betray him, right? Obviously, Obi-Wan Kenobi and her were together. That they were probably lovers. They whom he cared about most were dragging the happiness that they provided away from him and just providing it to each other rather than him in the context that he had always enjoyed, that he had always tried to protect. And his attachment, just like the Jedi talked about so much, was a huge factor in his turn to the dark side and his draw towards Palpatine and Palpatine's grand design. Palpatine, he was born a Sith-like person. He was born to a politician and a father who didn't love him a whole lot, but he never really loved his father. He saw his father's weak, having limitations, but it wasn't just because his father didn't love him. He wanted power. He wanted to not consider other people's opinions or other people to have the power to alter his grander designs. He wanted to be to the height of rulership, of control, and not take into other people's considerations. And he was always that way. There was no major event in Palpatine's life that made him this way. He was kind of a Sith. He was a controller. He was an autocrat. He was a selfish person from the moment, kind of, as far as we know, as far as Star Wars lore goes, from the moment that he was, born. Nothing changed him. Anakin took changing. He did not react to his environment in a way that was either logically informed or compassionately informed. What informed his reactions as Anakin, as a child, as a teen, and then more, all the way until Vader, fear became more and more the motivator, and love became smaller. And there seems to be a certain space within people in which either fear or love can exist. The more fear you have, the less love you can usually have. And this might seem weird, like, doesn't a mother really fear for her child's safety and things like that? But then if the fear is so big, it becomes static in the brain, it becomes static in your relationship, and it interferes with communication. You start thinking of the person as just your relationship to them rather than a person in and of themselves. So if fear is really high, then there's no mutual loving relationship. There's no value for the individual. If the love is very high, you will value the time that you have with somebody. And the fear is down here. There might be always some fear. The fear is down here. The love is high. You always value the time that you have with that person. And you will want to hear what they have to say. And their opinions and their understanding of themselves and their understanding of the relationship. Anakin was blind to all of that because his fear was so high, and the static of the mind consumed his mind and became very blurry. And, while, a parent or a lover or a child might be, we're all kind of attached to each other in the real world. We really are. And especially if we love somebody, we're very attached. But the greater the fear, the less the person exists, and the more that they become an object. And that's what Padme became to Anakin. Now, if we look at other Sith, like Darth Maul. Maybe he might have had a chance if he wasn't raised by Palpatine, but he was raised by Palpatine. So there's no major event that turned him. There was no major event that even made Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, maybe he could have been turned to the Sith if he was grabbed by the Sith early on in life. There's no major event. There was no major event that really made the majority of the Jedi, Sith or Jedi. There's no major event that we saw them change through this process. I think that Anakin's story is so compelling is because we understand and we see the shift. And he wasn't just one side or the other. He was motivated primarily by motivations that we as human beings naturally have. Fear for the ones that we love and wanting to keep them alive. And while his reactions as Anakin became more and more like, why are you doing that? That's so emotional. That's so foolish. Him being so vibrant in all of these transitions and all of his emotions really speak to what it feels like for us when we're going through these things. We don't have force power. We don't have these huge ideologies where we join an order or we betray our order or we're on the light side and we go to the dark side. We don't have these big elaborate things. We don't have these big elaborate reactions like Anakin has, even emotionally in conversation. Most of us don't have such intensity. But when we see it explained to us, the failures that he made in his love is shown to us in such a vibrant way, in such an extreme way, and in such a way where it didn't have to go that way if he just would have made the right decisions. It speaks to our own experience of life. However that life might continue, manifest, continue, or whatever decisions we make. It's almost like our heart is connected to that process that he's going through and is pained by it, but also we learn something without meaning to learn something. And I think that is the best kind of entertainment. If something is just entertainment, and Star Wars is entertainment, I think it has to speak to something within us. And I think Anakin's story most certainly does. And I don't think that most people can really understand exactly why Anakin was immediately killed children at some point and was so manipulated by Palpatine. We're seeing it, we're in the stands, we're watching the plays from the stands, and we can see it from a third person point of view and from above. We're not in the field playing, so it's obvious to us, but there's something about it that speaks to us because we've all been through that in some form. We've all loved and lost, or most of us have at least something. It doesn't have to be the same kind of romantic relationship, but we've loved and lost. We've tried and failed. We've felt really good with somebody, really good in a relationship of some kind, even if it's just a friendship, and then it failed for some reason, and then we look back on it, and it's almost like watching Anakin, where we made these stupid emotional decisions, burned these bridges too readily, too easily, cut these people off, or maybe even fallen in love too easily, and the love motivator wasn't properly analyzed and certainly wasn't maintained, and we've all had these failures. But seeing it so big with Anakin Skywalker, I think, speaks to a lot of us, even if most of us don't have the words to put it in or the words to explain it. It speaks to us, and we see it. A lot of us think that he's foolish. A lot of us think that we can see how it happened. And the difference between Anakin and us is, well, one, that he's a fictional character, but two, he had so much potential, and it was potential lost. And there's a part of ourselves that will always be attached to the potential of what relationships could have been. In this context, even with Obi-Wan Kenobi, friendships, and then also Padme Amidala, romantic relationships, all our hopes for what it could have been. And those hopes stick with us. And then they stick with us and they come to the forefront of our emotions when we view stories like Anakin's, even if it's just purely fiction. And all of those hopes, they kind of combine with our experiences and our reflection to form wisdom. And it was, I think, the wisdom, or perhaps the the original motivator, that original seed of light, of love, of wanting to keep people alive, that brought Anakin back to the forefront when he saved his son Luke from the Emperor by throwing the Emperor into that weird pit in the Death Star. And the Emperor was electrocuting Darth Vader as he's in the air. There was that original motivator of light, of love, of keeping his loved ones alive, came to the forefront. And I think in our hearts, it also does for relationships that we had or relationships that we still do have. That original love motivator comes to the heart in scenes like that, where it's like he's done so much bad, or the relationship went so wrong, like his relationship with Luke and, the Jedi Order and everything. But that original love motivator came to the forefront and he saved his son, because that original motivator was pure and it was light. And he ultimately was somebody motivated by light. Even if he failed a whole bunch, he came back to it. There was a redemption arc. And we all kind of want, the love that we wanted to be redeemed by finding somebody else. Or the love that we wanted to be substantiated and what we needed from somebody else to be substantiated by finding the right person. And as strange as it sounds, the light and his original love motivator being substantiated by him betraying Emperor Palpatine and saving his son is kind of the redemption of our own hearts and our own lives. And we see that original motivator and we feel it within ourselves, and we're like, maybe I can also be redeemed, and no matter how many failures I've had, I can correct them, I can be better, and I can find a better reality for myself. Because deep down, I think we're all, at the very core, I think we're all good. And I think that's what we can learn about love from Anakin Skywalker's story, from Star Wars. It's a story of motivations, of failures, but of redemption, because at our very core, every single one of us has that pure little light seed that really started everything, that all of our relationships and everything that we feel. And even if we fail, even if we become really bad people, some people don't have that redemption arc, but there's always that pure motivation. And Anakin, becoming Anakin again, coming from Darth Vader, shows that there's hope for all of us. And our original motivations were not in vain, and are not in vain. At any rate, I hope this was interesting. This is kind of a long one. I'm sorry I rambled a lot on this. It's one of those late night rambly videos, but feel free to hit that like button down there, like this video. Feel free to share this, and feel free to comment. I'm more than happy to communicate with y'all and hear what your thoughts are, so that this relationship can continue. At any rate, thank you very much for watching, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day.